Hello, my name is Riley Innes.
And my name is Nick Stevenson.
And this is a pre-recorded presentation for the 2022 meeting of the Society for Mathematical Psychology. Hi, welcome to our presentation. We're going to take you on a journey for the next few minutes to talk about modeling, model-based sampling, and dimensionality. In truth, our title is a bit of a lie, as this talk actually follows the plot of Honey, I Blew Up the Kids, the infamous sequel, where the kids start off huge and, spoiler alert, eventually shrink back down. In this talk, we're going to talk about two main topics. We'll begin by discussing model-based sampling.
And then link into group level models for these samplers. And we promise this will all get back to dimensionality reduction.
We must also declare that this talk is sort of a sales pitch, so we'll be disguised as salesmen for the following presentation, but not like real salesmen, more like researchers desperate for people to try out our tools we've made and neatly packaged up for you. Okay, on with the serious stuff.
So you're doing some modeling or model-based sampling, as we'll keep referring to it. You're thinking about which tool to use. Let's say you've decided to do some decision-making modeling. Are there really any other models?
I could use HDDM, Easy Diffusion, DMC, STAN, my own DEMCMC code, all great options for their own reasons.
But let's say you decide to use the new fancy pmwg sampler, because you've heard good reviews from Scott. We're going to run with the sampler for the rest of the talk too. Now in this talk, we're going to refer to models as models with a tractable likelihood, so no simulation-based stuff. Of course, you could use this modeling technique for any other models you might want to fit, but many people know of evidence accumulation models, so they make a nice example for now.
EAMs are an example of models that can be tricky to estimate. This is because parameters often exhibit collinearity. We all know how that can end up, don't we? We could fit these models per subject, such as Easy Diffusion does, but we've decided that we want to make a model-based inference at the group level, so we decided to use a hierarchical model. Luckily, we chose to use pmwg for this application.
As a quick recap, pmwg stands for particle metropolis within Gibbs. It is a hierarchical model-based sampling algorithm. For this, we sampled the random effects, i.e. subject-level parameters, using a particle metropolis approach, where on each iteration for each subject, many particles are evaluated, where each particle is a vector of parameter values. For the group level, a Gibbs step is used to estimate the group level model.
For the group level model, the standard usage is a multivariate normal group level distribution, meaning that we estimate the vector of parameter means in the variance covariance matrix. You can find more details on how the particles are generated and selected, as well as tuning parameters in the associated paper and links. For now, just know that the sampler is reliable and quite efficient, and focus on the group level model. One thing that pmwg does make easier is joint models, for which there are many types of linking functions. Here though, we focus on joint models with a covariance linking function, which don't rely as heavily on explicit hypotheses or complicated linking functions.
For joint models, we aim to simultaneously model multiple modes of data as a way of connecting elements across modes. For example, we might have 3 behavioral tasks collected for each individual, or data from behavior and neural measures, and we want to combine the models of these different modes. Using the covariance approach, we can propose a model for each component, then simply sum the likelihoods across components for each model estimation. Now, as the group level model includes the estimation of a covariance matrix, we can easily look at the relationships between the different modes.
For example, we could see whether drift rates were correlated between behavioral tasks, similar to Laura Wall's BRM paper, or we could see whether striatal activity was associated with threshold changes, as was seen in Beer-Forsman's 2008 PNAS paper.
On that PNAS paper, the authors used correlations between thresholds and striatal activity from fMRI. However, since 2008, recent research has shown how correlations can be attenuated if measurement noise is not accounted for. Dora Matzke's 2017 paper shows a nice example of this, where if correlations are estimated in a Bayesian way, they tend to recover the true correlation more accurately compared to Pearson correlations, and give us an estimate of the certainty around the correlations. This is where pmwg gives us one cool advantage. We can estimate correlations between parameters in the model, rather than looking at this post hoc.
The other benefit of estimating covariance between parameters in the group level model is that we can explicitly account for the collinearity between parameters that we know exists. By accounting for this, more of the measurement noise is sucked up by the model, and this can even help us with model estimation. But this also comes at a cost. higher dimensionality. Looking at some math for math psych, when we estimate a group level model with no covariances such that the parameters are assumed to be independent, that is, we assume normals across parameters, we might have a model with, say, 7 group level means and 7 group level variances. This is nice and simple. With a covariance matrix, not so simple. For this, we need to estimate 35 group level parameters. When we think of a joint model for 3 tasks with the same parameters, we'd have 21 means plus 441 minus 21 divided by 2 plus 21 diagonal elements, which equals 252 cells to estimate. We know that with more cells to estimate, certainty is lost. What do we do when we have lots of parameters? Just collect more data, right?
Wrong! Data is expensive and collecting from many people is tough, especially for many tasks. So we need a dimensionality reduction. We talked about hierarchical models before and briefly touched on the standard group level model used in pmwg, the multivariate normal. Hierarchical fitting has many advantages over single subject fitting, such as group level inference, shrinkage, for which pmwg tends to do a reasonable job on, i.e. not too much, as particles are sampled from both a group level proposal distribution and a proposal distribution centered around the individual's previous particle, and more precise correlation estimation. However, the high dimensionality and problems with estimation pose significant problems for this method, especially when thinking about joint models, which we do a lot of. So let's think more deeply about some group level models, starting with the parameter independent approach.
We call this approach the diagonal approach, as it's the same as estimating only the diagonal of a variance-covariance matrix for a multivariate normal. The benefits of the diagonal approach are that there are less parameters to estimate. Great. But we don't get any covariances or in-depth information about relations between parameters. So we're back to where we started. Bummer. Looking at the standard MVN approach, the benefits to this approach are that the covariances are captured, where they're ignored by the diagonal and in typical sampling applications. These correlation estimates are data-driven, meaning we don't have to make any specific assumptions about our joint models, and we can account for missing data through covariances. For example, if a person was missing a task, using the group level information, which is informed by between task correlations, we can still get an accurate representation of the parameter distribution. We've got some more work coming on this, which hopefully will come out later this year.
The downside of the MVN is the dimension problem, which isn't ideal, especially for our general psych experiments, with a measly 40 psychology undergrads recruited online and reimbursed with course credit. So we developed another approach, which we didn't really develop, but rather adapted. This method uses factor analysis to approximate the covariance matrix of the standard MVN. This means we can sample the elements of the factor structure in the Gibbs step, and then we can accurately reconstruct the covariance matrix to use for the particle metropolis step. Simple. For this approach, the components to estimate can be broken down such that we estimate the mean vector, the loading matrix, and the diagonal for the residual error variances.
There are several benefits to this approach. First and foremost, there's a major dimensionality reduction, which is especially evident as the number of parameters per subject increases. This nice graph shows that the number of cells to estimate in the factor structure linearly increases with the parameters per subject, whereas the MVN increases almost quadratically. This is consistent across the number of factors too, as adding factors only linearly increases the estimated cells of the factor decomposition.
Secondly, we've shown through simulations that the recovery of the covariance matrix is quite good in the factor structure, even when we use differing factor loading constraints. The constraint is placed on the factor loadings to protect against the sign switching problem, and more of this can be seen in the paper. The good thing about constraint is that we show several different options for this, where we could either have a completely unconstrained factor loading matrix, meaning the factors may be non-interpretable, but the covariance matrix can be fully recovered. Minimal constraint, where the loadings for the upper triangle are fixed to 0 and factors are interpreted relative to the diagonal. Diagonal constraint, where the diagonal is fixed to 1 to constrain the loadings relative to given parameters. And extra constraint, where we can include hypothesis-driven constraints, such that some parameters don't load on certain factors.
Another nice thing about this method is that we can make inference on the factor loadings rather than the full covariance matrix, which can be much more simple for high dimensional models or joint models where we want to look at latent factors rather than every parameter correlation. And the most important thing, dimensionality reduction.
quick maths for a joint model of 21 parameters, we now estimate 81 group level parameters. And that's a lot less than the MVN. Okay, so great. Now you have your evidence accumulation models for each task for each person. You're convinced by the factor analysis pmwg method, and you want to get started.
Well, the nicest thing about these methods, we've done all the hard work already and made nice code for anyone to use. Well, anyone that has a likelihood function for the subject level model. The group level models and priors on these are all worked out and included in code, which can be found here. Good job, Nick. Great. So now I have a code to make the model, and I can get samples for the model, for which I can do inference on the group level means and the latent factors. Now you may be wondering, but I have so many models to test. How could I compare them all?
Well, good news for you. We've also got model comparison methods for estimating the marginal likelihood of the models given their data. The method is based on importance sampling squared from Tran's BRM paper. What's more, this comparison method can even be used to test various group level models. That means you could fit a model with the diagonal approach and compare it to the multivariate normal, where the comparison takes into account the dimensionality through the prior to see if the covariants are even necessary. Or you could test how many factors are present in your joint model.
We've now got a draft paper on arXiv, which will be submitted soon. But if you want to check it out, it includes the full scope of the methods we've touched on in this video. Finally, we've been doing some work with Andrew Heathcote on finding more applications for these methods. I'm now happy to say that DMC's upgrade is in development and on the way.
So this summer, keep an eye out for EMC, which now uses the pmwg assembler and will have functionality for factor analysis group level models built in. We know you're just as excited as we are.
So that's all for now on our virtual maths psych journey. We look forward to your questions at the conference.